Sarah Martinez learned to fight before she learned to read properly. Growing up in the concrete maze of East LA's housing projects, violence wasn't something that happened to other people. It was the background music of daily life. The sound of gunshots mixed with sirens was as common as traffic noise. Drug dealers controlled the corners, and gang colors determined which streets were safe to walk down. Her mother, Elena, worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table and avoid the welfare line. She cleaned offices at night, served lunch at a school cafeteria during the day, and did laundry for neighbors on weekends. Despite the exhaustion that showed in the lines around her eyes, Elena never stopped believing her daughter could have a different life. Sarah was 8 years old when she first saw someone get shot. She was walking home from school, her backpack heavy with books that other kids made fun of her for actually reading, when 2 cars started racing down the street. The popping sounds came fast and sharp, and suddenly people were screaming and running. A young man collapsed on the sidewalk just 20 feet from where Sarah stood frozen. Instead of running like everyone else, Sarah walked closer. She had seen enough movies to know the man was bleeding badly from his leg. Without thinking, she took off her school sweater and pressed it against the wound, just like she had seen on television. The man looked up at her with wide, scared eyes, but he stopped trying to move. Sarah stayed with him until the ambulance came, her small hands steady and sure. That night, Elena found Sarah sitting on their apartment steps, staring at her bloody sweater. When she asked what happened, Sarah didn't cry or shake like most children would. She just looked up and said, "Mom, I think I want to help people who get hurt." Elena sat down beside her daughter and wrapped her arms around her. "Mija, there are lots of ways to help people. But first, you need to help yourself. You need to get out of here." From that moment on, Sarah had a plan. She studied harder than any kid in her school, often doing homework by candlelight when the electricity got cut off. She joined every program that would keep her off the streets: after-school tutoring, community center sports, volunteer work at the local clinic. While other kids her age were learning to navigate gang territory, Sarah was learning to navigate a different kind of battlefield. High school brought new challenges. Sarah had grown into a tall, athletic teenager with her father's strong jaw and her mother's determined eyes. She played 3 sports and maintained a near-perfect grade point average, but college seemed impossibly expensive. The military recruiters who visited her school talked about education benefits and serving your country, but Sarah was interested in something more specific. She had been reading about special operations forces, the elite soldiers who went places others couldn't go, who saved people others couldn't save. The more she learned about their training and missions, the more she knew she had found her calling. These weren't just soldiers. They were the people who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. They were the ones who stayed calm when everything fell apart. On her 18th birthday, Sarah walked into the Army recruiting station wearing her best dress and carrying a folder full of school records, athletic achievements, and recommendation letters. The recruiter, Sergeant Mike Torres, looked up from his paperwork and smiled. "What can I do for you, miss?" "I want to join Special Forces," Sarah said without hesitation. Torres paused, his pen hovering over the forms. "Well, let's start with basic training first. Special Ops is something you work up to." "I understand that," Sarah replied. "But that's where I'm going." Torres had been recruiting for 12 years and had heard similar statements from countless young people, most of them washed out of basic training. But something in Sarah's voice made him look more carefully at her file. Her grades were exceptional, her physical fitness scores were off the charts, and her volunteer work showed the kind of character the military valued. "Why Special Forces?" he asked. Sarah thought about the young man bleeding on the sidewalk, about her mother working herself to exhaustion, about all the nights she had fallen asleep to the sound of violence outside her window. "Because when everything goes wrong, someone has to be able to make it right," she said. "I want to be that someone." 6 months later, Sarah shipped out to basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. She was one of only 3 women in her company of 50 recruits. The drill sergeants made it clear from day one that they didn't expect the women to make it through the full training cycle. They were wrong about Sarah. Basic training was designed to break people down and build them back up as soldiers. The physical demands were brutal: long runs in full gear, obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone who hated the human body, and endless hours of push-ups, sit-ups, and burpees. The mental pressure was just as intense, with drill sergeants screaming instructions and insults designed to see who would crack under stress. Sarah thrived. While other recruits struggled with the early morning runs, Sarah finished first every time. When others complained about the obstacle courses, Sarah asked if she could run them again to improve her time. The drill sergeants tried to break her with extra duties and punishment exercises, but Sarah just smiled and asked for more. By the end of basic training, Sarah had earned the respect of her instructors and fellow recruits. She graduated at the top of her class and received orders for advanced infantry training. But that was just the beginning. Special Forces selection was legendary for its difficulty. Only about 20% of candidates made it through the initial assessment phase, and even fewer completed the full qualification course. The training was designed to push soldiers beyond their physical and mental limits, to find those rare individuals who could operate effectively in the most dangerous and unpredictable situations. Sarah arrived at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, on a humid summer morning that made the air feel like soup. The Special Forces training compound was larger than she had expected, with obstacle courses, shooting ranges, and training buildings spread across hundreds of acres of pine forest. Her fellow candidates were impressive: Rangers, paratroopers, and infantry veterans who had already proven themselves in combat. Most of them had years of military experience. Sarah was 21 years old and had been in the Army for less than 2 years. The first phase was called assessment and selection, or simply selection by those who had survived it. For 3 weeks, candidates would be pushed through increasingly difficult physical and mental challenges designed to identify those with the potential to become special operations soldiers. The day started at 4 in the morning with physical training that would have killed most civilian athletes. The instructors never told the candidates how far they would be running or how long the exercises would last. Everything was designed to test mental toughness as much as physical capability. Sarah's background in the projects had taught her how to endure uncertainty and discomfort. While other candidates worried about what was coming next, Sarah focused on the immediate task in front of her. When they were told to run, she ran. When they were told to climb, she climbed. When they were told to carry a wounded teammate through miles of rough terrain, she carried. The attrition rate was brutal. By the end of the first week, 15 candidates had either quit or been dismissed. By the end of the second week, the number was down to 37 from the original 62. The instructors never offered encouragement or told anyone how they were performing. The only feedback was whether you were still there the next morning. Sarah was still there. The third week brought the dreaded stress phase, where candidates were deprived of sleep and food while being subjected to increasingly complex mission scenarios. This was where mental toughness became more important than physical strength. The instructors wanted to see who could think clearly and make good decisions when exhausted and under pressure. During one exercise, Sarah found herself leading a team of 4 candidates through a navigation course in complete darkness. They had been given minimal food and no sleep for 36 hours, and tempers were running high. 2 of her teammates were arguing about which direction to go, while the third had basically shut down from exhaustion. Sarah pulled out her compass and map, studying them by the red light of a small flashlight. She calculated their position and plotted the route to their next checkpoint. When she announced the direction, one of the arguing candidates challenged her reading of the terrain. "You sure about that, Martinez? If you're wrong, we're going to be walking in circles all night." Sarah looked at him calmly. "I'm sure, but if you want to check my work, go ahead." The candidate studied the map for several minutes before nodding grudgingly. "Yeah, you're right." They reached their checkpoint ahead of schedule, and Sarah's calm leadership under pressure was noted by the instructors who were secretly observing from concealed positions throughout the course. By graduation day, only 23 candidates remained. Sarah was one of them. More importantly, she had finished in the top 5 overall, earning a place in the Special Forces qualification course that would turn her into a fully trained Green Beret. The qualification course was 9 months of intensive training in everything from advanced marksmanship to foreign languages to medical procedures. Sarah learned how to shoot accurately at distances most people couldn't even see clearly. She studied Arabic and Pashto, the languages spoken in the regions where American Special Forces were most active. She practiced battlefield medicine until she could perform emergency surgery in complete darkness. But perhaps most importantly, she learned how to work as part of a team where every member's life depended on the others. Special Forces operated in small units, usually 12 soldiers, where individual failure could mean mission failure and death for the entire team. Sarah's teammates initially had doubts about working with a woman in combat situations. Special Forces had only recently opened its ranks to female soldiers, and the integration hadn't always been smooth. Some worried that a woman wouldn't have the physical strength needed for certain missions. Others questioned whether male soldiers would be able to focus on the mission if they were worried about protecting a female teammate. Sarah addressed these concerns directly during a team meeting 6 months into the qualification course. She stood up in front of her 11 male teammates and spoke honestly about the situation they all faced. "I know some of you have concerns about having a woman on the team," she began. "I understand those concerns, and I'm not going to pretend they're not real. What I will tell you is this: I didn't come this far to be a liability. I came here to be an asset. I don't expect you to protect me any more than I expect to protect you. I expect us to protect each other." She paused and looked around the room, making eye contact with each of her teammates. "I can't promise you that I'll be stronger than all of you, because I'm probably not. What I can promise is that I'll work harder than all of you to make sure my strength is never the limiting factor in what we can accomplish together." Over the following months, Sarah proved that promise. When they practiced hostage rescue scenarios, she was often chosen to take point because of her speed and accuracy with a rifle. When they trained in medical procedures, she became the team's primary medic because of her steady hands and calm demeanor under pressure. When they studied foreign languages and cultural awareness, she excelled at the interpersonal skills that were often crucial for gathering intelligence and working with local populations. By the time Sarah graduated from the Special Forces qualification course, her teammates had stopped thinking of her as the woman on the team. She was simply Martinez, a reliable, competent soldier who could be counted on when things got dangerous. Her first assignment was with the 5th Special Forces Group, based at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, but specializing in operations in the Middle East and Central Asia. The unit had deployed multiple times to Afghanistan and Iraq, and Sarah knew she would likely be heading to one of those theaters of operations soon. The team she joined had been together for 2 years and had completed 3 combat deployments. They were led by Captain James "Jimmy" Walsh, a soft-spoken Texan who had enlisted straight out of high school and worked his way up through the ranks. The team sergeant was Master Sergeant Tony Rodriguez, a veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan who had earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star for his service. When Sarah reported for duty, Rodriguez looked her up and down appraisingly. He had heard about the woman who had finished near the top of her qualification course class, but he had learned not to put too much stock in training performance until he saw how someone performed in actual combat. "Welcome to the team, Martinez," he said simply. "We deploy to Afghanistan in 6 weeks. Between now and then, we're going to make sure you're ready." The next month and a half was a blur of intensive preparation. The team practiced room clearing and hostage rescue scenarios until they could execute them perfectly in complete darkness. They studied intelligence reports about their area of operations, learning about local tribal politics and key personalities they might encounter. They tested and retested their equipment, making sure every weapon, radio, and piece of gear was functioning perfectly. Sarah threw herself into the preparation with the same intensity she had brought to every challenge in her life. She memorized the names and faces of dozens of local leaders and suspected insurgents. She practiced her medical skills until she could start in or treat a gunshot wound while blindfolded. She spent hours on the shooting range, pushing her accuracy to levels that impressed even her veteran teammates. The night before they deployed, the team gathered at Rodriguez's house for a farewell dinner. It was a tradition that went back years, a chance to relax and bond before heading into danger together. Sarah felt honored to be included in the ritual that had been shared by dozens of Special Forces soldiers over the years. As they sat around Rodriguez's kitchen table, sharing stories and laughing at inside jokes she didn't yet understand, Sarah felt a profound sense of belonging. These men had accepted her not because she was a woman breaking barriers, but because she had proven herself worthy of their trust and respect. She had no way of knowing that in less than 90 days, that trust would be put to the ultimate test in ways none of them could imagine. She had no idea that the skills and determination that had brought her this far would soon be pushed beyond anything she had experienced in training. All she knew was that she was exactly where she belonged, part of a team of warriors preparing to face whatever dangers awaited them in the mountains and valleys of Afghanistan. She was ready for combat. She was ready to prove herself under fire. She just had no idea how much that proof would cost her. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and diesel fumes at Forward Operating Base Chapman in eastern Afghanistan. Sarah stepped off the bird with her 11 teammates, their gear heavy on their backs, and their eyes already scanning for threats. The base was a sprawling collection of concrete barriers, prefab buildings, and guard towers surrounded by razor wire and the stark beauty of the Afghan mountains. This was Sarah's first combat deployment, but her teammates were veterans of the long war that had been raging since 2001. Captain Walsh had done 3 previous tours, and Rodriguez had been fighting in Afghanistan longer than some of their newer teammates had been in the military. They moved through the base with the easy confidence of soldiers who knew their way around a war zone. The mission briefing came 2 hours after their arrival. They gathered in a windowless room lit by fluorescent lights, studying maps and intelligence reports spread across a metal table. Their area of operations was the Kunar province, a mountainous region along the Pakistan border that had been a hotbed of Taliban and Al-Qaeda activity for years. "The enemy knows this terrain better than we ever will," Captain Walsh explained, pointing to the valleys and ridges marked on the map. "They've been fighting here for decades, first against the Soviets, then against the Northern Alliance, and now against us. They know every cave, every trail, every place to hide or set up an ambush. Their job was to work with local Afghan forces to hunt down high-value targets and disrupt enemy supply lines coming across the border for Pakistan. It was dangerous work that required them to operate in small teams, often far from any backup or support." Sarah studied the intelligence photos of suspected insurgent leaders and memorized the locations of friendly forces and known enemy positions. This was what she had trained for, but she knew that no amount of preparation could fully prepare someone for the reality of combat. Her first mission came 3 days later. Intelligence had identified a suspected Taliban commander hiding in a village about 20 miles from the base. The team's job was to conduct a night raid, capture or kill the target, and gather any intelligence they could find. They moved out after midnight, traveling in 2 heavily armored vehicles through terrain that looked like the surface of an alien planet under their night vision goggles. The mountains rose like black walls on either side of the narrow road, and Sarah could feel the weight of thousands of years of history in the landscape around them. The village was a collection of mud brick compounds scattered along a valley floor. Intel suggested their target was hiding in a house near the center of the settlement, but the team had learned to expect the unexpected. Taliban fighters were skilled at using civilian areas to their advantage, setting traps and ambushes for coalition forces. Sarah was assigned to the team that would clear the target building while the others established a security perimeter around the village. As they approached the compound on foot, moving silently through irrigation ditches and orchards, her heart rate increased, but her breathing remained steady. This was what she had trained for. The house was larger than most in the village, with high walls and a heavy wooden gate. Rodriguez led the breach team, using explosives to blow the gate open while Sarah and two others prepared to enter and clear the rooms beyond. The explosion echoed off the mountains like thunder, and immediately the night erupted in gunfire from multiple directions. Muzzle flashes lit up windows and rooftops throughout the village as Taliban fighters who had been waiting in ambush opened fire on the American team. "Contact left! Contact left!" Rodriguez shouted into his radio as bullets whined overhead and sparked off the stone walls around them. Sarah pressed herself against the wall next to the blown gate, her rifle ready, adrenaline flooding her system. This wasn't training anymore. The bullets flying past her head were real, fired by people who wanted to kill her and her teammates. "Martinez, on me," Rodriguez called out, and Sarah followed him through the smoking breach into the courtyard beyond. The compound was larger than it had appeared from outside, with multiple buildings and several possible hiding spots. Sarah moved with her rifle raised, scanning for threats while Rodriguez cleared the main house room by room. They found evidence that their target had been there recently, warm tea glasses, maps, and communication equipment, but the man himself was gone. He had either escaped during the approach or had never been there at all. Outside, the firefight continued. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with the heavier sound of American M4 rifles. Captain Walsh's voice crackled over the radio, calling for air support and reporting multiple casualties among the Afghan forces who were supposed to be supporting the mission. "We need to get out of here," Rodriguez said as he finished searching the last room. This was a setup from the beginning. They moved back toward the gate, but the sound of gunfire from that direction had intensified. Someone was trying to cut off their escape route. Rodriguez keyed his radio to report their status to Captain Walsh. "Actual, this is 3. Target building is clear, negative on the package. Multiple hostiles between us and the vehicles." Walsh's response was immediate. "Roger 3. Work your way to the alternate extraction point. Air support is 5 minutes out." The alternate extraction point was a field about half a mile from the village, but getting their men moving through terrain controlled by an unknown number of Taliban fighters. Sarah checked her ammunition and prepared to fight her way out. The next 20 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. She and Rodriguez moved through the village like ghosts, using shadows and cover to avoid the Taliban fighters who were searching for them. Twice they had to hide while armed men passed within feet of their position. When they finally reached the extraction field, the rest of the team was already there, treating 2 wounded Afghan soldiers and calling in helicopter support. Everyone had made it out alive, but it had been a close thing. On the helicopter ride back to base, Sarah sat in silence and replayed the mission in her mind. She had performed well under fire, keeping her cool and following orders even when bullets were flying around her. But she had also learned something about the reality of combat that training couldn't teach, the feeling of being hunted by people who knew the terrain better than you did. Over the following months, Sarah participated in dozens of similar missions. Some were successful, resulting in capture insurgents and valuable intelligence. Others were frustrated by bad weather, faulty information, or enemy countermeasures. All of them were dangerous. Sarah's teammates began to rely on her for her steady nerves and accurate shooting. During one mission, she spotted an insurgent sniper positioned in a tower more than 400 meters away and took him out with a single shot, probably saving several lives. During another operation, she treated a wounded Afghan soldier under fire, keeping him alive until a medical helicopter could evacuate him. Captain Walsh noted her performance in his reports, writing that Martinez had consistently demonstrated the courage, competence, and leadership expected of special operations personnel. Rodriguez was more direct in his assessment. "She's got ice water in her veins," he told the other team leaders. "I've seen guys with years of experience fold under less pressure than she's handled." But Afghanistan had a way of humbling even the most confident soldiers, and Sarah's real test was still to come. It happened on a mission that started like dozens of others. Intelligence had identified a Taliban weapons cache hidden in a remote village near the Pakistan border. The team's job was to locate and destroy the weapons before they could be used against coalition forces. The village was isolated, reachable only by a single dirt road that wound through mountain passes for 30 miles from the nearest paved highway. It was exactly the kind of place Taliban fighters used as a sanctuary, far from major coalition bases, and easy to defend if attacked. The mission began before dawn, with Sarah's team traveling in a convoy of 3 armored vehicles. The plan was to reach the village, locate the weapons cache, destroy it, and return to base before nightfall. It should have been a routine operation. The first sign of trouble came about halfway to the target, when the lead vehicle reported seeing fresh tire tracks in the road. Someone had been using the route recently, which could mean Taliban fighters were moving supplies or positioning themselves for an ambush. Captain Walsh made the decision to continue with the mission, but he ordered increased vigilance and readiness for contact. Sarah checked her weapon and radio, making sure everything was functioning properly. She had learned to trust her instinct about dangerous situations, and something about this mission felt different from the others. The village appeared deserted when they arrived. No smoke from cooking fires, no children playing in the streets, no signs of normal daily life. It was as if the entire population had simply vanished overnight. "This doesn't feel right," Rodriguez muttered as they established a security perimeter around the vehicles. Walsh agreed, but the mission had to continue. Intelligence indicated the weapons cache was hidden in a compound on the far side of the village, and they needed to check it out before reporting back to base. Sarah was part of the team that would search the target building while the others maintained security around the vehicles. As they moved through the empty streets, her sense of unease grew stronger. The silence was too complete, too perfect. Even abandoned villages usually showed some signs of recent life. The target compound was larger than most, with high walls and multiple buildings inside. The main gate stood open, another sign that something was wrong. Taliban fighters usually secured their weapons caches with multiple layers of security. Rodriguez led the search team through the gate, with Sarah and 2 others following in tactical formation. The first building they entered was empty except for some old farming tools and sacks of grain. The second building contained what they were looking for. The weapons cache was impressive. Dozens of AK-47 rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, mortars, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. All of it was new or recently cleaned, ready for use against coalition forces. Sarah began photographing the cache for intelligence purposes while Rodriguez called in their discovery to Captain Walsh. That's when they heard the first explosion. The blast came from the direction of their vehicles, followed immediately by the sound of intense gunfire. Walsh's voice crackled over the radio, tense but controlled. "All teams, we are under attack from multiple directions. Heavy weapons fire from the north and east. 2 vehicles damaged, unknown casualties." Sarah and Rodriguez looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. They had walked into a trap. The weapons cache was bait, designed to draw them into the village where Taliban fighters could surround and destroy them. "We need to get back to the vehicles," Rodriguez said, but even as he spoke, they could hear gunfire getting closer to their position. The Taliban had planned their ambush carefully. While one group attacked the vehicles, another moved to cut off the search team's escape route. Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of boots running on gravel as armed men surrounded the compound where they were trapped. Rodriguez tried to radio for air support, but the response wasn't encouraging. The nearest attack helicopters were committed to another operation and wouldn't be available for at least 30 minutes. Artillery support was limited because of the proximity to civilian areas. They were on their own. The attack began with rocket-propelled grenades slamming into the compound walls, followed by sustained small arms fire from multiple directions. Sarah and her teammates took cover behind the thick stone walls of the building where they had found the weapons cache, returning fire through windows and doorways. The firefight that followed lasted for more than 2 hours. Sarah went through all of her primary ammunition and had started using captured AK-47 rounds from the weapons cache. The Taliban fighters seemed endless, attacking in waves that were beaten back only to be replaced by fresh fighters. During a brief lull in the fighting, Rodriguez managed to re-establish radio contact with Captain Walsh. The news wasn't good. One vehicle had been destroyed by RPG fire, and several soldiers had been wounded. The remaining vehicles were holding their position, but they couldn't move to extract the search team without exposing themselves to more anti-tank fire. "We're going to have to fight our way out of here," Rodriguez told his team. Sarah checked her ammunition supply. Less than 60 rounds remaining. Around her, the other team members were in similar situations. They had enough firepower for one good push, but if they got bogged down in another extended firefight, they would run out of ammunition completely. The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would use the remaining grenades to blast a hole in the compound's back wall. Then, make a fighting withdrawal to a small hill about 200 meters away, where they could establish a defensive position until air support arrived. Sarah helped set the charges while the others laid down, covering fire to keep the Taliban fighters from advancing. When the wall exploded outward in a shower of stone and dust, she was the first one through the breach, her rifle ready and her eyes scanning for threats. The Taliban fighters hadn't expected them to break out through the back wall, and for a moment Sarah and her teammates had the advantage of surprise. They moved quickly across the open ground toward the hill, but it didn't take long for the enemy to react. Bullets began snapping past Sarah's head as she ran, and she could hear the angry buzz of rounds passing close enough to tear her uniform. Behind her, one of her teammates cried out as he was hit, but kept running. They reached the hill and established a defensive perimeter just as the Taliban launched a coordinated assault on their position. What followed was the most intense firefight of Sarah's military career. Outnumbered at least 3-1, with limited ammunition and no immediate hope of rescue, she and her teammates fought with the desperation of soldiers who knew they might not survive the day. Sarah found herself thinking about her mother back in Los Angeles, working her 3 jobs and wondering if her daughter was safe. She thought about the young man she had helped on the sidewalk all those years ago, and how that moment had started her on the path that led to this hilltop in Afghanistan. As the Taliban fighters pressed their attack, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She was not going to die on this hill, and neither were her teammates. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, she was going to find a way to get them all home. Sarah pressed herself against the rocky outcrop and tried to count muzzle flashes in the gathering darkness. The Taliban had them surrounded on 3 sides, using the cover of boulders and sparse vegetation to move closer with each passing minute. Her ammunition was running critically low, maybe 20 rounds left in her current magazine, with only 2 more magazines in her pack. Rodriguez was bleeding from a head wound that painted the left side of his face crimson, but his hands were steady on his rifle. Specialist Jake Morrison, the youngest member of their team, had taken a bullet through his shoulder, but was still returning fire with grim determination. Staff Sergeant Mike Shun was working the radio, trying to coordinate with Captain Walsh's position and get an updated estimate on air support. "Birds are still 20 minutes out," Shun reported, his voice barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "Walsh's position is taking heavy fire. They can't move to extract us without getting chewed up." Sarah did the math in her head. 20 minutes was an eternity in a firefight like this. At their current rate of ammunition consumption, they would be down to throwing rocks long before help arrived. She looked around at her teammates' faces and saw the same calculation in their eyes. "Rodriguez," she called out during a brief lull in the firing. "What's our ammunition situation?" The team's sergeant grimaced as he took inventory. "Maybe 200 rounds total for the whole team. Couple of grenades left, but if we use them here, we won't have anything left for a final assault." Sarah studied the terrain around their position. The hill they were defending offered good visibility and fields of fire, but it was also a dead end. Once the Taliban fighters got close enough, there would be nowhere to retreat. They needed to break contact and find a better defensive position, but moving across open ground under fire was a death sentence. That's when she noticed something that might offer a solution. About 50 meters down the back slope of the hill, partially hidden by shadows and rocks, was what looked like the entrance to a cave or tunnel. If they could reach it, they might be able to hold a more defensible position or even find another way out of the area. Rodriguez, you see that cave opening at 7 o'clock, about 50 meters down the slope? The team's sergeant followed her gaze and nodded slowly. Yeah, I see it. You thinking what I think you're thinking. It's better than staying here and getting overrun. We're going to run out of ammunition long before air support arrives. Rodriguez considered their options for a moment, then keyed his radio to contact the other team members. Listen up. Martinez has spotted a possible fallback position. We're going to bound back to that cave entrance. Chun and Morrison first, then Martinez, and I will cover your movement. Moving under fire was one of the most dangerous maneuvers in infantry combat, but it was better than staying in place and getting slowly picked apart. Chun and Morrison prepared to move while Sarah and Rodriguez laid down, covering fire to suppress the Taliban fighters. Go! Rodriguez shouted, and the two soldiers sprinted down the slope while Sarah and Rodriguez fired as rapidly as they could manage. The Taliban fighters immediately intensified their fire, trying to cut down the running soldiers before they could reach cover. Sarah watched tracer rounds streak past Chun and Morrison as they bounded from rock to rock, their heavy gear making them clumsy targets in the fading light. Morrison stumbled about halfway to the cave, and for a heart-stopping moment Sarah thought he had been hit again. But the young soldier recovered his footing and continued moving, diving behind a large boulder just as a burst of machine gun fire chewed up the ground where he had been standing. Chin reached the cave entrance first and immediately began returning fire to cover Morrison's final sprint to safety. The specialist made it to the cave just as Sarah and Rodriguez prepared to make their own movement. Your turn, Martinez, Rodriguez said. I'll be right behind you. Sarah took a deep breath and broke cover, sprinting down the slope with her rifle clutched across her chest. The world around her exploded into chaos as the Taliban fighters concentrated their fire on her running figure. Bullets snapped past her ears and kicked up puffs of dust from the rocks around her feet. She was about 20 meters from the cave when she heard the distinctive whoosh of a rocket-propelled grenade being fired. Time seemed to slow as she dove toward a cluster of rocks, knowing she wouldn't reach cover in time. The explosion lifted her off her feet and slammed her into the ground with crushing force. Her ears rang like church bells, and for a moment she couldn't tell which way was up. Blood ran down her face from cuts caused by flying rock fragments, and her left leg felt like it was on fire. But she was alive. Rodriguez appeared beside her, dragging her toward the cave entrance while laying down, covering fire with his rifle. Sarah tried to stand, but immediately collapsed as her left leg buckled under her weight. Looking down, she could see blood soaking through her uniform pants and a piece of metal shrapnel protruding from her thigh. Can you move? Rodriguez asked as they reached the cave entrance. Yeah, I can move, Sarah lied, gritting her teeth against the pain. The leg was badly damaged, but she wasn't going to let her teammates down by admitting it. The cave was deeper than it had appeared from the outside, extending back into the hillside for at least 30 meters. Chun and Morrison had already established defensive positions at the entrance, using rocks and equipment to create improvised fighting positions. Rodriguez helped Sarah to a position where she could cover one of the approaches to the cave while he examined her wound. The shrapnel had gone deep into the muscle of her thigh, and she was losing blood at a concerning rate. Without proper medical treatment, she would be in serious trouble within an hour or two. Morrison, get over here, Rodriguez called. Martinez needs medical attention. The young specialist crawled over with the team's medical kit, his own shoulder wound forgotten in the urgency of the moment. Sarah watched him work, impressed by his calm competence under pressure. The pain was incredible as he cleaned and bandaged the wound, but she bit down on a piece of cloth and endured it without making a sound. "I can't get the shrapnel out without a real surgeon," Morrison explained. "But I've stopped most of the bleeding. You're going to need a hospital, though." Sarah nodded, already knowing that a hospital was a long way off. First, they had to survive the next few hours, and that was looking increasingly unlikely. Through the cave entrance, she could see muzzle flashes getting closer as the Taliban fighters pressed their attack. Chen's voice echoed in the cave as he reported their situation to Captain Walsh. "Actual, this is Chun. We've reached a fallback position, but Martinez is wounded and needs medical evacuation. Request immediate air support. Over." Walsh's response was frustrating, but not surprising. "Roger, Chun. Air support is still 15 minutes out. Can you hold your position until then?" Chun looked around at his wounded teammates and their dwindling ammunition supply. "We'll hold, Actual, but make it fast." The next 15 minutes tested every ounce of training and courage the four soldiers possessed. The Taliban fighters had located the cave and were systematically working their way closer, using grenades and concentrated fire to pin down the Americans while they maneuvered for a final assault. Sarah found herself thinking about her childhood in East LA, about her mother working multiple jobs to give her daughter a chance at a better life. She thought about the drill sergeants who had pushed her to become stronger than she thought possible, and the teammates who had accepted her as an equal in the dangerous brotherhood of special operations. She was not going to let any of them down. Despite the pain in her leg and the blood loss that was making her lightheaded, Sarah continued to return accurate fire whenever Taliban fighters exposed themselves. Her shooting had always been exceptional, and now was keeping her teammates alive. Every shot had to count, because they couldn't afford to waste ammunition on anything less than a certain kill. Rodriguez, fighting with the steady professionalism of a veteran non-commissioned officer, coordinated their defense while managing his own head wound and calling in updates to Captain Walsh. Chun worked the radio and shared his ammunition with Morrison, whose shoulder wound was making it difficult for him to handle his rifle effectively. The attack came in waves, with the Taliban fighters probing different approaches to the cave while building up for what would obviously be their final assault. Sarah could hear them calling to each other in Pashto, coordinating their movements, and building up courage for the dangerous job of clearing a defended cave. When the final assault began, it came from two directions simultaneously. A group of fighters approached the cave entrance directly, while another group tried to work around to a position where they could fire down into the cave from above. Sarah spotted the flanking movement first, catching a glimpse of armed figures moving among the rocks above and to the right of their position. She shifted her fire to engage this new threat, knowing that if the Taliban fighters gained the high ground, they would be able to kill everyone in the cave with impunity. Her first shot caught one of the flanking fighters' center mass, dropping him among the rocks. Her second shot missed as the other fighters scrambled for cover, but it forced them to abandon their flanking maneuver and seek better protected positions. Meanwhile, Rodriguez and Chun were engaging the frontal assault with everything they had left. The Taliban fighters were close enough now that Sarah could hear individual voices shouting orders and encouragement. In a few more minutes, it would come down to hand-to-hand combat in the confined space of the cave. That's when they heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of helicopter rotors approaching fast and low. "Air support inbound," Chun shouted into his radio, marking our position with smoke. He threw a smoke grenade toward the cave entrance, and within seconds orange smoke began billowing out across the hillside. The Apache attack helicopter appeared over the ridge line like an avenging angel, its 30mm cannon already spinning up for action. What followed was a masterpiece of close air support. The Apache pilot, guided by Chen's radio directions, and the orange smoke marking the friendly position, systematically destroyed the Taliban fighting positions with cannon fire and Hellfire missiles. The sound was deafening, but to Sarah and her teammates, it was the sound of salvation. Within 10 minutes, the hillside was quiet except for the occasional crack of burning ammunition from the destroyed Taliban positions. The Apaches circled overhead, searching for any remaining threats, while a medical evacuation helicopter approached from the direction of the base. Sarah was losing consciousness from blood loss by the time the medics reached their position. She was vaguely aware of being loaded onto a stretcher and carried to the helicopter, but the pain medication they gave her made everything fuzzy and dreamlike. Her last clear memory of the mission was seeing Rodriguez, Chun, and Morrison being helped aboard the same helicopter. All of them were wounded, but all of them were alive. In the chaos and violence of the ambush, they had looked after each other and fought their way out together. Sarah woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Germany, her left leg encased in bandages and metal framework that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The doctors explained that the shrapnel had caused severe damage to her femur and the surrounding muscle tissue. She had undergone 2 surgeries to remove bone fragments and repair the damage. "Will I be able to walk normally?" she asked the orthopedic surgeon, a kind-faced woman with graying hair and tired eyes. The surgeon hesitated before answering. "We're going to do everything we can, Sergeant Martinez. But I won't lie to you, this is a serious injury. There's significant nerve damage, and some of the bone destruction is permanent. Even with the best possible healing, you're likely to have some degree of permanent disability." Sarah stared at the ceiling for a long time after the surgeon left. She thought about all the years of training and preparation that had brought her to Special Forces, about the teammates who depended on her, and about the mission she still felt called to complete. The doctors and physical therapists were excellent, but their goals were different from hers. They wanted to get her walking again, maybe even running eventually. Sarah wanted to get back to her team and back to the fight. Over the following weeks, as she underwent painful rehabilitation and multiple additional surgeries, Sarah learned the full scope of what had happened during the ambush. The Taliban had planned the operation for weeks, using intelligence from local sources to set up an elaborate trap designed to destroy an entire Special Forces team. Captain Walsh and the soldiers who had stayed with the vehicles had fought off multiple attacks while calling in air support for Sarah's trap team. 2 Afghan soldiers have been killed in the fighting, and several Americans have been wounded, but the mission had ultimately been successful. The weapons cache had been destroyed, and intelligence gathered from captured Taliban fighters had led to several follow-up operations. Rodriguez, Chun, and Morrison had all recovered from their wounds and returned to duty. They sent regular updates and get-well messages, but Sarah knew they were probably wondering the same thing she was wondering. Would she ever be able to return to special operations? The Medical Evaluation Board met 6 weeks after the ambush to determine Sarah's fitness for continued military service. She sat in the sterile conference room with her leg still partially immobilized, listening to doctors and administrators discuss her case as if she weren't there. The orthopedic surgeon presented x-rays and medical reports documenting the extent of her injuries. A physical therapist described her progress in rehabilitation and the limitations she was likely to face going forward. A military psychologist discussed her mental state and readiness to return to duty. When they finally asked for her input, Sarah spoke with the same quiet determination that had carried her through every challenge in her life. "I understand that my injuries are serious," she began. "I understand that my recovery is going to take time and hard work. What I don't understand is why anyone would think this means I'm finished as a soldier." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each board member. 6 weeks ago, I was trapped on a hillside with 3 wounded teammates, outnumbered and nearly out of ammunition. We could have given up. We could have decided the situation was hopeless. Instead, we fought our way out and all came home alive. If I can do that with a piece of shrapnel in my leg and blood pouring out of me, I think I can handle whatever challenges rehabilitation has to offer. The room was quiet for a moment before the board chairman, a colonel with multiple combat tours of his own, responded. "Sergeant Martinez, no one questions your courage or determination. The question is whether your injuries will prevent you from performing your duties safely and effectively. Sarah had been preparing for this moment since she woke up in the hospital. She had thought carefully about what she wanted to say and how she wanted to say it. Sir, with respect, I think that's the wrong question. The right question is what I can contribute to the mission with whatever capabilities I have left. Maybe I won't be able to do everything I used to do. Maybe there will be some limitations I'll have to work around. But I didn't join Special Forces to do easy things. I joined to do things that other people said were impossible. The medical evaluation board adjourned without making an immediate decision, but Sarah could read the expressions on their faces. They were impressed by her attitude, but they were also realistic about the challenges she faced. Her military career was hanging in the balance, and the outcome was far from certain. As she was wheeled back to her hospital room, Sarah thought about the long road ahead. The physical rehabilitation would be brutal, and there was no guarantee that she would ever regain full function in her injured leg. Even if she did recover, there was no certainty that the military would allow her to return to special operations. But Sarah Martinez had never been deterred by long odds or uncertain outcomes. She had built her entire life on the principle that determination and hard work could overcome almost any obstacle. This would just be the biggest test of that principle she had ever faced. The real fight was just beginning. The Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Maryland became Sarah's new battlefield. The sterile hallways and rehabilitation rooms were as foreign to her as the mountains of Afghanistan had once been, but she approached her recovery with the same methodical intensity she had brought to Special Forces training. The Medical Evaluation Board had granted her 6 months of intensive rehabilitation before making a final determination about her fitness for duty. 6 months to prove that Sergeant Sarah Martinez wasn't finished, that the woman they thought was broken could rebuild herself into something even stronger. Her first physical therapy session was a humbling experience. Simple exercises that any child could perform left her sweating and exhausted. Walking 10 feet without assistance felt like climbing a mountain. The titanium rod and screws holding her femur together made her leg feel alien and mechanical, as if it belonged to someone else. Dr. Patricia Williams, her physical therapist, was a former Army medic who had transitioned to civilian health care after her own combat injuries ended her military career. She understood the unique challenges faced by wounded warriors trying to return to active duty. The hardware in your leg is going to be permanent, Dr. Williams explained during their first session. Your body needs to learn to work with it, not against it. That's going to take time, and it's going to hurt. Sarah gritted her teeth and pushed through the pain of each exercise, each small movement that brought burning sensations through a rebuilt leg. The doctors had warned her that nerve damage might cause permanent numbness and weakness, but she refused to accept those limitations as final. Between physical therapy sessions, she studied everything she could find about her injuries and recovery process. She researched new surgical techniques, experimental treatments, and rehabilitation methods that other patients had used successfully. If there was a way to push her recovery beyond what the doctors thought possible, she was going to find it. News from her old unit came sporadically through letters and occasional phone calls from Rodriguez and the other team members. They had deployed again, this time to Iraq, where they were conducting operations against insurgent networks in the volatile Anbar province. Rodriguez wrote that the team had a new medic, a young sergeant from Texas who was competent, but didn't have Sarah's steady hands or calm demeanor under pressure. "We miss having you here, Martinez," he wrote in one letter. "These new guys are good, but they're not you. The team isn't the same without our Ice Queen keeping us all in line." The nickname Ice Queen had started as a joke about Sarah's ability to remain calm under pressure, but it had evolved into a term of respect and affection. Reading it now, confined to a hospital bed with an uncertain future, Sarah felt a surge of determination that bordered on rage. She was not going to let her story end in a hospital room. She was not going to become another casualty statistic, another wounded warrior who faded into civilian life after giving everything to her country. She was going to get back to her team, back to the fight, no matter what it took. The first major milestone came after 6 weeks of intensive therapy. Sarah walked the length of the hospital corridor without assistance, her rebuilt leg supporting her weight despite the constant ache and occasional sharp stabs of pain. Dr. Williams watched with professional satisfaction, but Sarah could see the concern in her eyes. "You're pushing yourself too hard," the therapist warned. "Recovery isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. If you try to do too much too fast, you're going to set yourself back." But Sarah had spent her entire life pushing herself harder than anyone thought was wise or safe. From the housing projects of East LA to the mountains of Afghanistan, every significant achievement in her life had come from refusing to accept other people's limitations. "How hard is too hard?" she asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, not hard enough is what gets you sent home." Her rehabilitation schedule became legendary among the hospital staff. Sarah was in the physical therapy room before dawn every day, working through exercises that left other patients groaning in pain. She studied her medical files with the intensity of a graduate student, questioning every treatment decision and pushing for more aggressive therapeutic approaches. The mental challenge was as difficult as the physical rehabilitation. Sarah had built her identity around being a special forces soldier, someone who thrived in the most demanding and dangerous situations the military could offer. Now she was struggling with basic tasks that any civilian could perform without thinking. Dark thoughts crept in during the long nights when pain made sleep impossible. What if she never fully recovered? What if the medical board decided she was no longer fit for duty? What if her teammates moved on without her, building new bonds and facing new dangers while she fought her battles in hospital rooms? Those thoughts were interrupted one night by an unexpected visitor. Rodriguez appeared in her hospital room doorway, still wearing his desert combat uniform and carrying the distinctive smell of dust and diesel fuel that marked someone freshly returned from a deployment. "Heard you were feeling sorry for yourself," he said with the blunt affection that had made him such an effective team sergeant. Sarah tried to sit up straighter in her bed, embarrassed to be seen in the vulnerable position of a patient rather than a soldier. "Rodriguez, what are you doing here? I thought you guys were still deployed." "We rotated back last week. Captain Walsh sent me to check on our missing medic and see if she was ready to get back to work." Sarah felt a surge of hope mixed with anxiety. "What's the word from command? Any decision on my status?" Rodriguez pulled up a chair and sat down, his expression becoming serious. "Honestly, the brass is split. Some people think you should take a medical retirement and be proud of what you've accomplished. Others think you might be able to come back in some capacity, maybe not frontline special ops, but still contributing to the mission." He leaned forward, meeting her eyes directly. "But what matters is what you think. Do you really believe you can get back to where you were? Because if there's any doubt, any hesitation, you need to face that honestly. The team can't afford to have someone who's not 100% committed." Sarah had been preparing for this conversation since the day she woke up in the German hospital. She had thought about it during every painful therapy session, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt about her future. "Rodriguez, 6 months ago, I was bleeding out on a hillside in Afghanistan with a piece of shrapnel in my leg. I could have quit then. I could have accepted that the situation was hopeless and waited to die. Instead, I kept fighting until air support arrived and got us all home alive." She gestured toward her damaged leg and the rehabilitation equipment surrounding her hospital bed. "This is just another kind of battlefield. The enemy is different. It's doubt, pain, and physical limitations instead of Taliban fighters. But the mission is the same. I don't quit. I don't accept defeat. I find a way to win." Rodriguez studied her face for a long moment, looking for any sign of uncertainty or bravado. What he saw was the same quiet determination that had impressed him when she first joined the team, strengthened by months of pain and struggle. "All right then," he said simply, "what do you need from me?" Over the following weeks, Rodriguez became an unofficial part of Sarah's rehabilitation team. He worked with Dr. Williams, to design training exercises that would prepare Sarah for the specific physical demands of special operations. While other patients worked on walking and basic mobility, Sarah was doing tactical movement drills and combat conditioning exercises. Rodriguez also brought news from the Special Forces community about other wounded warriors who had successfully returned to duty. Some had required changes in their roles or responsibilities, but they had found ways to contribute to the mission despite significant injuries. Lieutenant Colonel Mason lost his left arm in Iraq, but came back as an intelligence officer, Rodriguez told her during one of his visits. Staff Sergeant Johnson has a prosthetic leg, but still does training and mentoring work with new recruits. The military is changing, Martinez. They're starting to understand that wounded doesn't automatically mean worthless. The breakthrough came during her 4th month of rehabilitation. Sarah was working on an obstacle course that Dr. Williams had designed to test her mobility and endurance when she suddenly realized that her damaged leg was no longer holding her back. The pain was still there, and probably always would be, but she had learned to work through it and compensate for the limitations. More importantly, her body had adapted to the titanium hardware in ways that actually provided some advantages. The metal rod made her femur stronger than it had been before the injury, and the rehabilitation had built muscle strength and flexibility throughout her entire leg that exceeded what she had possessed as an uninjured soldier. She completed the obstacle course in a time that would have been respectable for any Special Forces soldier, injured or not. Dr. Williams watched with amazement as Sarah navigated the challenging course with fluid grace that belied her serious injuries. "I've been doing this for 15 years, the therapist said afterward, and I've never seen anything like that. You've not just recovered from your injuries, you've built yourself into something stronger than you were before." But the real test came when Sarah requested permission to attempt the Army's standard physical fitness test. Passing the test wouldn't guarantee her return to special operations, but failing it would definitely end any hope of continued military service. The test consisted of push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run, all performed to specific standards within time limits. For someone with Sarah's injuries, the run would be the most challenging component. 2 miles might not sound like much, but it had to be completed in less than 18 minutes while carrying the full weight of the hardware in her rebuilt leg. Sarah had been preparing for this moment for months, building her cardiovascular fitness and testing her leg's endurance during longer and longer training runs. But she knew that mental preparation would be as important as physical conditioning. This wasn't just a fitness test. It was a statement about who she was and what she was capable of achieving. The morning of the test, Sarah woke before dawn and went through her usual routine of stretching and mental preparation. She thought about the young woman who had left East LA to join the Army, about the Special Forces training that had forged her into an elite soldier, and about the teammates who were counting on her to find her way back to them. She thought about her mother, Elena, who had worked 3 jobs to give her daughter a chance at a better life. She thought about the wounded Afghan soldier she had treated under fire, and about the Taliban fighters who had tried to kill her on a hillside in Afghanistan. All of those experiences had led to this moment, a simple physical fitness test that would determine whether Sergeant Sarah Martinez had a future as a Special Forces soldier. The push-ups and sit-ups went smoothly. Sarah's upper body strength had actually increased during her rehabilitation, and she completed both events well above the minimum standards. But as she lined up at the starting line for the 2-mile run, she felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her stomach. The first mile passed without major difficulty. Sarah's rebuilt leg held up well, and her pace was steady, if not spectacular. But as she began the 2nd mile, the accumulated stress on her injured limb began to tell. Pain shot through her thigh with each impact, and she could feel her form beginning to deteriorate. With half a mile remaining, Sarah was falling behind the pace needed to pass the test. Her leg felt like it was on fire, and every step sent jolts of agony through her rebuilt femur. This was the moment she had been dreading, the point where her injuries would finally prove too much to overcome. But instead of slowing down, Sarah remembered something Rodriguez had told her during one of his visits to the hospital. Pain is just information, Martinez. It tells you something is happening, but it doesn't tell you to quit. Only you can decide whether to quit. She picked up her pace, driving through the pain with the same mental toughness that had carried her through Special Forces training and combat in Afghanistan. Her rebuilt leg screamed in protest, but it held together. Her lungs burned, but they kept processing oxygen. Her heart pounded like a drum, but it kept beating. Sarah crossed the finish line with 30 seconds to spare. As she bent over, gasping for air and fighting waves of nausea, she realized that she had just proven something important to herself and everyone watching. She wasn't the same soldier who had been wounded in Afghanistan. She was something new, something forged by pain and determination into a weapon that was in some ways more effective than what she had been before. Dr. Williams was waiting with a bottle of water and a proud smile. "How does it feel to be back, Sergeant Martinez?" Sarah straightened up, her legs still throbbing, but her spirit soaring. "It feels like I never left." The Medical Evaluation Board reconvened 2 weeks later to review Sarah's rehabilitation progress and make a final determination about her fitness for duty. This time, she walked into the conference room under her own power, wearing her dress uniform and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had just achieved the impossible. The board members reviewed her medical files, fitness test results, and recommendations from her rehabilitation team. Sarah sat quietly, knowing that she had done everything possible to demonstrate her readiness to return to special operations. When I asked if she had anything to add, Sarah stood up and spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had faced death and survived. 6 months ago, some people in this room thought my military career was over. They looked at my injuries and saw limitations. They saw problems that couldn't be solved and barriers that couldn't be overcome. She paused, meeting the eyes of each board member in turn. What they didn't see was that every barrier I've faced in my life has made me stronger. Growing up in the projects made me tough. Special Forces training made me resilient. Getting wounded in Afghanistan taught me that I can survive anything and come back stronger than before. She gestured toward her rebuilt leg, no longer something to hide or be ashamed of. This isn't a disability, it's proof that I don't quit. It's evidence that when everything goes wrong, I find a way to make it right. That's exactly the kind of person you want on a Special Forces team, and that's exactly the kind of soldier I am. The board chairman, the same colonel who had questioned her readiness 6 months earlier, smiled for the first time since Sarah had known him. "Sergeant Martinez, it is the recommendation of this board that you be returned to full duty status with no restrictions on your assignment to special operations units." Sarah felt a surge of triumph that was sweeter than any victory she had ever experienced. She had fought her way back from an injury that everyone said would end her career. She had proven that being broken didn't mean being beaten. But as she left the conference room and prepared to rejoin her team, Sarah knew that the hardest test was still ahead of her. She had proven she could pass medical evaluations and fitness tests, but could she perform effectively in combat with her rebuilt leg? Could she earn back the trust and confidence of teammates who had seen her carried away on a stretcher? The only way to find out was to get back in the fight and prove herself all over again. Sarah Martinez had never backed down from a challenge in her life, and she wasn't about to start now. The Ice Queen was back, and she was stronger than ever. The C-130 transport aircraft descended through gray clouds toward Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, carrying Sarah back to the war that had nearly destroyed her 8 months earlier. She sat in the webbed seating alongside 24 other soldiers, her gear heavy and familiar on her shoulders, her rebuilt leg steady beneath her. This deployment was different from her first tour. Instead of a nervous energy of a soldier heading into combat for the first time, Sarah felt the calm confidence of someone who had already been tested by fire and emerged stronger. The titanium rod in her femur was a constant reminder of what she had survived and overcome. Captain Walsh was waiting when the transport touched down, his face breaking into a genuine smile when he saw Sarah walking down the cargo ramp under her own power. Behind him stood Rodriguez, Chun, and Morrison, the teammates who had fought beside her on that hillside and lived to tell about it. "Welcome back, Ice Queen," Rodriguez said, using the nickname that had become a badge of honor rather than a simple description. "Good to be back," Sarah replied, meaning every word. The familiar sights and sounds of the air base, helicopters lifting off on missions, soldiers moving with purposeful urgency, the constant background noise of a military installation at war, felt like coming home. But Sarah quickly discovered that her return to special operations wouldn't be as simple as picking up where she had left off. The Special Forces community was small and tightly knit, and word of her injuries and recovery had spread throughout the units operating in Afghanistan. Some soldiers questioned whether she would be a liability in combat situations. Others wondered if she had lost the edge that made her an effective operator. The doubts weren't entirely unreasonable. Special Forces missions required absolute confidence in every team member's ability to perform under extreme stress. If someone couldn't trust their teammate to keep up during a long-range patrol or to move effectively under fire, it put the entire team at risk. Sarah's new team leader, Captain Maria Santos, addressed the situation directly during their first meeting. Santos was a veteran of 4 combat deployments who had earned her position through competence and courage rather than politics or favoritism. "Martinez, I've read your files and talked to people who served with you before your injury," Santos began. "Everyone says you're a hell of a soldier, but I need to know for myself that you can perform at the level this unit requires." Sarah had expected this conversation and had prepared for it carefully. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns. I know that my injury has created questions about my capabilities. All I ask is the chance to prove myself through performance rather than paperwork." Santos nodded approvingly. "Fair enough. You'll start with basic team exercises and work your way up to more complex operations. No special treatment, no allowances for your injury. If you can't keep up or perform at standards, you're off the team." "Clear. Crystal clear, ma'am." The next several weeks put Sarah through the most rigorous evaluation of her career. She participated in long-range reconnaissance patrols that tested her endurance and mobility over difficult terrain. She practiced close-quarters battle drills that required rapid movement and precise shooting under stress. She underwent medical training exercises that tested her ability to treat wounded soldiers while under simulated enemy fire. In every exercise, Sarah not only met the standards expected of Special Forces operators, she exceeded them. Her rebuilt leg showed no signs of weakness or limitation, and her tactical skills had actually improved during her rehabilitation as she studied new techniques and equipment developments. More importantly, her teammates began to trust her competence and reliability. During one particularly challenging training exercise, Sarah's team became lost in mountainous terrain during a night navigation course. While other team members argued about directions and consulted GPS devices, Sarah used traditional map and compass skills to determine their location and guide them safely back to their extraction point. "How did you figure that out when the rest of us were stumbling around in the dark?" asked Staff Sergeant Kevin Park, a communications specialist who had initially been skeptical about serving with a wounded soldier. Sarah smiled as she folded her map and compass. "I spent a lot of time studying during my rehab. When you can't walk very well, you find other ways to improve your skills." Her first real mission came 6 weeks after her return to Afghanistan. Intelligence had identified a Taliban bomb-making facility operating in a remote village near the Pakistan border. The team's job was to infiltrate the area, destroy the facility, and capture or kill the bomb makers responsible for several recent attacks on coalition forces. As Sarah prepared her equipment and studied the mission briefings, she felt the familiar combination of anxiety and excitement that preceded dangerous operations. This was what she had fought so hard to return to, the opportunity to make a difference in a conflict that mattered. The mission began with a helicopter insertion under cover of darkness. Sarah's team fast-roped from the hovering aircraft into a landing zone several miles from their target, then began a careful approach through terrain that was perfect for Taliban ambushes. Sarah moved through the rocky landscape with the fluid grace of someone who had spent months rebuilding her body and mind for exactly this kind of operation. Her rebuilt leg performed flawlessly, carrying her across difficult ground without any sign of weakness or hesitation. The target building was a traditional Afghan compound with high mud brick walls and multiple interior structures. Intelligence suggested that the bomb makers worked in a workshop located in the main house, with security provided by armed guards positioned around the perimeter. Sarah's role in the assault was to provide overwatch and medical support while the rest of the team cleared the buildings and secured the objectives. She positioned herself on a small hill overlooking the compound, her rifle ready to engage any threats that might emerge during the operation. The assault began with precision and speed. Santos led the breach team through the main gate, while other team members secured the perimeter and blocked potential escape routes. Sarah watched through her rifle scope as her teammates moved through the compound with the practiced efficiency of professional soldiers. Everything was going according to plan until a Taliban fighter emerged from a concealed position behind the main house, an AK-47 rifle in his hands, and Santos directly in his line of fire. Sarah didn't hesitate. Her rifle was already trained in that direction, and she smoothly shifted her aim to engage the threat. The shot rang out across the valley, and the Taliban fighter dropped instantly, his weapon clattering harmlessly to the ground. "Good shot. Overwatch." Santos's voice crackled through Sarah's radio earpiece. "Target down." The rest of the mission proceeded without significant resistance. The bomb-making facility was destroyed, valuable intelligence was gathered, and several suspected Taliban operatives were captured for questioning. The team extracted successfully without casualties or complications. During the helicopter flight back to base, Santos sat down beside Sarah and spoke quietly enough that the other team members couldn't hear over the aircraft noise. "That was solid work tonight, Martinez. Your shooting probably saved my life." Sarah nodded acknowledgement of the compliment, but she was already thinking about the next mission and the challenges it might bring. Saving her team leader's life felt good, but it was just one moment in what she hoped would be many more years of service. Over the following months, Sarah participated in dozens of similar operations. Some were high-intensity raids against known Taliban positions. Others were long-range reconnaissance missions that required her to spend days in enemy territory gathering intelligence. A few were humanitarian operations, providing medical aid to Afghan civilians in remote villages where no other help was available. In every mission, Sarah performed with the competence and courage that had made her a special forces operator before her injury. But now she brought additional qualities that came from her experience of being wounded and fighting her way back to active duty. She had patience with younger soldiers who were struggling with the demands of special operations, remembering her own early challenges and offering guidance without being condescending. She had perspective on the risks and sacrifices involved in military service, appreciating every opportunity to serve rather than taking it for granted. Most importantly, she had an unshakable confidence in her ability to overcome obstacles and find solutions to seemingly impossible problems. When missions went wrong, and they sometimes did, Sarah was often the soldier who stayed calm and found a way forward. That confidence was tested during a mission that began as a routine patrol, but quickly escalated into one of the most dangerous situations of Sarah's career. Her team was conducting a presence patrol in an area where Taliban activity had increased recently, showing the flag and gathering information about enemy movements. The patrol was moving through a narrow valley when they were hit by a complex ambush that had obviously been planned and rehearsed. Taliban fighters opened fire from concealed positions on both sides of the valley, while other insurgents moved to block the team's escape routes. Sarah found herself separated from the rest of the team when a mortar round exploded nearby, knocking her to the ground and temporarily stunning her with its concussion. When she regained her senses, she could hear intense gunfire from the direction where her teammates had been moving, but she couldn't see them through the smoke and dust kicked up by the explosion. Her radio had been damaged by shrapnel from a mortar round, leaving her unable to communicate with the rest of the team or call for air support. She was alone in enemy territory with limited ammunition and no way to coordinate with friendly forces. A less experienced soldier might have panicked or made the mistake of trying to fight their way out immediately. But Sarah had learned patience during her rehabilitation, and she used that patience now to assess her situation carefully before taking action. She could hear Taliban fighters calling to each other in Pashto, coordinating their movements as they tried to locate and eliminate the scattered American soldiers. From her concealed position behind a large rock, Sarah could see several armed men moving through the valley, searching for targets. Rather than revealing her position by shooting, Sarah decided to use stealth and patience to work her way toward where she had last seen.